David, welcome back. We've had you here before. You've run for executive counselor in District 5 a number of times and held the seat previously. I want to start with something because it seems that partisanship has become a growing factor in the relationship between governors and the council. In the time that I've been watching, and you've probably been part of that or watching that for a lot longer, and maybe it always has been. But I want to ask how important is whether the majority of the council is from the same party as the governor?
Well, I think when the majority is the same party as the governor, generally there's less controversy and things flow better. But I think the people elect a particular person because of their party's views, and it may not be 100% Republican platform or 100% Democrat platform. So I think the root of your question is, when you get to the council, should you be voting for the philosophy that you represented when you ran for office? And I think that's the root question. And I would say the answer is yes. As long as you tell the people when you're running for office what that is. Did that answer your question?
It's somewhat, but also as a council member, which you've been before, does it matter to you when you're voting on topics whether the governor is a Republican or Democrat, or should it matter?
I think it's more issues to me. Maybe if I gave you an example, I could clarify that. I did not vote for John Broderick to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court because he handed down the Claremont decision, which I don't think was a right decision. So I think a counselor has to have that flexibility, and obviously in this term, Councilor Pignatelli voted against Ryan Terrell for the State Board of Education. I believe because it doesn't match her education philosophy.
Just to kind of jump off of that, do you think that partisanship hinders the council, the way the council operates these days? And if you do, what do you think should be done about it?
Well, I think that's why they made elections, for one thing, because the people will decide. When you go there, generally you've told the people at election time, this is who I am, this is what I represent, this is what I stand for. And sometimes, things don't get done because there's two different philosophies. We don't have a Supreme Court justice right now because of that problem, and that needs to be solved. And I don't think it is going to be solved until we have a majority of the same party on the council and in the governor's office. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. And to kind of harken back to what you were talking about with judicial nominations, in terms of the contracts that you are vetting, do you think that counselors should vote against contracts only if they don't make economic sense, or do you think if there's an issue with the company involved, like say you don't agree with their how they pay their work, how much they pay their workers, or you don't agree with their philosophy, or how do you think that should play out?
Well, a lot of it has to do with how we put out the contract, what the rules are when we put it out to bid. If the rules are qualified bidder and strictly low bidder, that's generally the way we go. I know, and you may be asking, because I know Council Valinsky has a, a track record of asking every contractor, or a lot of the contractors who get the low bid, what they're paying their employees. But I think we have to take that low bid as long as the contractor's complying with the law, as long as they're qualified to do the work, or until the legislature says you're going to pay prevailing wage, and the legislature hasn't said that. So it's my position to go with the low bidder.
I'll jump in. We were talking about the council used to deal with contracts over $10,000. Now that's up to $25,000 and $10,000 for personal services. What do you think is the right threshold for these contracts, contract amounts?
Well, first off, that's incorrect information. Back when Pignatelli won back in 2012, and they had a majority, the Democrats bumped that number up to 25,000. But when I got reelected, I put that number back down to $10,000, because we were seeing a lot of contracts coming in. We'd get two $9,999 contracts or $12,250 contracts if it were 25,000. We've seen a lot of double contracts, was the point. So we moved it back down to 10,000, keep a better eye on that, and then required a list of all the other contracts, just so we could lower than the 10,000 threshold, so we could see where the money's going and make sure there was no pattern of department heads rewarding their friends.
Another thing we wanted to talk about was the DOT's 10-year plan, which often has elements of it being moved, 15, 20 years out. What needs to happen for the state to properly deal with its infrastructure needs, and what is the council's role in that?
Well, it's, as far as the highway fund goes, that's the legislature's role to set the gas tax, vehicle registrations, to put the money in the pot, to know what amount of money we have to deal with. But you're right, it is the executive council is the one that starts the 10-year highway plan and sets their priorities for projects throughout the state. Then the governor has a crack at it, and he might make some changes, and then it goes into the legislature in the form of a bill, and they may make some changes, and what comes out the other end is what we're going to do. And then, but the council we may have money that comes in a certain pot sooner than we expected, then we can move those projects up, or DOT can move them up with our consent. And if there's some money that doesn't come in, or we run into engineering problems and lose the timetable, we have the flexibility of delaying those projects. I mean, I think some of the big ones coming up in Cheshire County that I've seen for a long time is the bridge in that's Hillsborough County, but the bridge in Peterborough. A big project coming up in Jaffrey will be a large roundabout where 202 and 124 come together, which has been a difficult intersection there. Route 12 in Cheshire County was in the 10-year highway plan, and we're watching those projects move forward. It takes a while. It just takes a while between the regional planning commissions setting their priorities, and then the council and the legislature getting them in the plan. You got to plan on 20 years, even though it's a 10-year plan. That's basically the amount of money we have highway fund wise. Turnpike funds were a little more flexible.
I'm going to just jump in since I have a connection, and my apologies for the cutting out. But so the council's charge is to be a fiscal watchdog, and Governor Sununu's chosen not to run the vast bulk of more than $1 billion in CARES Act funding past the councilors for approval. Is that okay?
It's not okay when it's not an emergency. I mean, that would be an area that I disagree with the governor. That spending needs to go to the council. And, you know, it's an item that the current council could play hardball with, you know, and say, look, we're not going to do X if you don't do Y.
Could I just ask for a little clarification on your answer there? Because I believe the governor's position is that he has declared a state of emergency, and therefore that enables him to make these decisions without legislative or executive council approval. So is it your position that as long as the state of emergency still remains in place, that he's on solid ground?
Well, I guess if you got to go to the root, you know, it's my opinion the state of emergency shouldn't have been renewed. You know, it was the original intent. The way it was laid out was, you know, it's 2 to 3 weeks. Give the legislature time to do their job. It really should be a legislative function, and then to put the money in the bank, receive it, put it in the bank, and the council's function to spend it and oversee that spending. So he's doing what he's doing. I disagree with it. On the other hand, the legislature didn't step in and do their job. They should be stepping in to do their job. They didn't call the legislature back into session for that purpose.
I see, and then, but so you're critical of the fact that if I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to make sure I understand it. It sounds like you're critical of the decision of the governor to keep the state of emergency declaration going on as long as it is, but as long as it is in place, he's doing what he's doing.
Somebody has to manage the crisis, and the legislature didn't step up. So I disagree with the way it's being done, but I'm not sure that that's his fault.
Thank you.
I'd like to pivot a little bit to the responsibility of the council to vet appointments to state offices. How would you approach making those decisions, and how much would you rely on information and input from experts in a given field? So, for example, lawyers and law enforcement when weighing judicial nominations.
Oh, I think it's a council's responsibility to listen to all input when we have nominations, and that's a way we find out things that you wouldn't normally know. You know, mostly we find out good things. Most of nominees are qualified, but once in a while we find out, you know, some information about somebody that gives us pause. But I would say that if you're going to vote on these nominations, that you should make sure that you don't have yourself conflicts of interest, and pay attention to who you're listening to. And, you know, to be specific, you know, Deb Pignatelli's family lobbies for Eversource. She should not be voting to put people on the Public Utilities Commission who regulate rates. She shouldn't be voting on people to the Site Selection Committee when we want to have pipelines, because they represent other big energy companies. They represent Anthem, Blue Cross and Blue Shield, who has the state health employees contract. She shouldn't be voting on the state health employees contract. They represent big pharmacy. She shouldn't be voting on the state employees health pharmacy plan for the 12,000 state employees. They represent credit unions. She shouldn't be voting on who the banking commissioner is. And she rarely recuses herself. So I think we really, you know, need to listen to everybody. One of her lobbyists was just the people that work for the Pignatelli Law Group and lobbying group was just put on the Air Resources Council. And that's one of the only times she abstained. But how did he get there? The DraftKings contract for the sports betting outfit that we just hired to manage our sports betting, a Pignatelli client And again, that's one of the few other ones she didn't vote on, but it just seems awful coincidental that their clients are getting these nominations and contracts.
I can just jump on the judicial nominees question. Something that you mentioned earlier was the vacancy on the Supreme Court, which has been there for over a year after the council voted down Attorney General McDonald. How long do you think that the vacancy can reasonably continue?
Well, I think in the situation that we're in, it's clear that it's not gonna be filled until there's a new council or a new governor, or both. I think that's the governor's position. I think that's a sad thing, but that's what it is.
So, David, you mentioned earlier. I'm sorry. You mentioned earlier having. No, I'm lost. Back briefly. Having that when voters are choosing their candidates for council, they know what that candidate represents. So what would you want to tell voters you represent?
Regarding judges or
no, just as a general sense, but it can include judges.
Yeah. Well, as a general sense, as a small business person, having to balance a budget, having to make sure my employees get paid, sometimes before I do even, that I have that experience to watch the budget, to watch out for spending. We keep an eye on the state bond rating. One of the council jobs is to approve any borrowing. And so if our borrowing, the bond rating people don't like to see our borrowing to be more than 10% of our general fund revenues. And the last time I checked, we were around 7%. So that helps us keep our good borrowing rate so we don't waste the taxpayers' money paying an interest. We keep an eye on contracts. I've used examples of not euthanizing payloaders for the sheer sake of supposed less air pollution, balancing what we spend to clean the air versus what we get for it. For instance, one of the things we learned through this federal, it would be like cash for clunkers, but for payloaders. And you would kill a perfectly good payloader. You have to destroy the engine block so it never can be used again. So I asked the question of environmental services, digging into the weeds here. These payloaders are going to cost, it was well over $1 million, or almost $250,000 a piece, or several $1 million. If we took the same money and put it in fixed put things to clean pollution, what will we get bang for the buck? And the answer was, you get a whole lot more bang for the buck if you took the money you're going to buy these payloaders with and put it in smokestack scrubbers and cleaner air from fixed pollution things. So that's kind of a concrete example of the type of digging we do sometimes. Sometimes when we see a lot of contracts coming in from a particular department, I'm thinking of resources and parks. A lot of small contracts were coming in with just one bidder, and I began to ask why, and I found out that we needed to change our procedures. They were asking for a bid bond on a $7,000 project. and we're only getting one bidder because no one wants to go through all that paperwork to put a bond up before you even bid on it, before you even know if you're going to get it. So a bid bond is totally different than a performance bond that secures the performance and you're going to do the job right, as well as the state won't write you the check unless you do the job right. So we eliminated the bid bond for small contracts, and then we started getting in multiple bids for these smaller jobs, roof jobs, floor jobs, plowing, parking lot, that type of thing. So watching the watchdog for the spending is definitely, you know, part of the job. And I guess with the judges, people know that I expect judges to follow the Constitution, not to write law. And as I've already stated, I feel the Claremont decision was an example of when the court wrote the law. Using the words cherish education meant fund education. I know you guys are all familiar with that. So I try to lay that out in campaign so that people know where I'm at, and if they agree with me, they'll vote for me, and if they think I'm wrong, they won't.
Just wanted to kind of jump back to one of my previous questions that I don't think I fully asked, but wanted to get your take on. So we had candidates this year and in previous years, you know, running on issues like climate change or things like that. Do you think it's appropriate for a counselor to use this larger issue as kind of a lens through which to see contracts and that kind of thing? Do you think it's appropriate because that's what they ran on and people know what they're getting? Or what's your take on that?
Well, I think I just gave you one example of that fits what, you know, that fits what you're saying, and that's we all want clean air. So where can we get the best bang for the buck? And that's, you know, the type of thing I'll be looking for with environmental issues. So yeah, in a way, the counselor should interject themselves in the best way to get the bang for the buck. For the most part, but not always, the legislature sets the policy. They tell us, they put the money in the pot to spend on different things, you know, in the budget, and we generally follow that. But sometimes we deviate from that, you know. So, and I've made it very, you know, one of my deviations, and you all know this, so I might as well just get the elephant out of the room, right? I won't vote for Planned Parenthood funding. I've made that very clear. You know, the legislature has put money in that pot, and I won't support it. So, yes, you deviate that once in a while.
So you've been in the legislature, you've been on the executive council. So what's leading you to run for executive council rather than legislature? Why is council a better fit for you?
Well, I have to say I like both. There's things about being in the legislature, especially in the Senate. One of my jobs was counting votes as majority whip. And it's a little more like a chess game in the Senate, and you got to work to get, you know, gather the votes to get the correct policy passed. And it's a little easier when you're in the majority party, which, you know, I was the 6 years that I was in the Senate. But I think you can also be useful after you've learned that end in the executive branch, trying to carry out the policies of the people that set the policy and put the money in the pot. I like the management side as well.
David, is there anything else that voters ought to know about you before they cast their ballots?
Well, I guess, you know, I would say to you that we do have the experience that we just talked about, knowing the legislative side, both starting in the House and the Senate, knowing how things work. I was a chairman of Health and Human Services in the Senate for 4 years, so I know a little bit about that. I don't think you can ever know it all. But I also, would recap that I do run my own business. I think I have pretty good judgment in picking managers for the state's business. The Department of Education and the Attorney General on the law enforcement side. From my experience, I would say that people know that I'm a tough on crime guy, not like Deb Pignatelli that was supporting the Hillsborough County attorney when they had a secret plea deal and didn't tell the victim of domestic violence, where they let a person go and he ended up killing the victim 5 months later. I'm not soft on crime like that. She won't answer the question whether Michael Addison sentence should be carried out. She just won't answer the question whether she would vote to commute the sentence. Even though her Democrat colleagues have answered that question, she won't. And I would not support commuting Addison's sentence. It was a smoking gun murder with plenty of witnesses. There wasn't like a circumstantial evidence case. It was a smoking gun case. And he just outright murdered a law enforcement officer, and the sentence should be convicted by a jury. His sentence should be carried out. So I wouldn't put up with what Black Lives Matters is doing in other parts of the country. I think one of the counselor's jobs is to hire the director of police standards and training. And, I'll look for, when it comes time to replace that person and having counsel to that office, we want law enforcement that follows the law. We don't want them taking advantage of the law. You probably remember, in 1998, with the false child abuse accusations at my house, I was not happy the way the police handled it, where they wouldn't follow the law. So I have personal experience in that area, and I expect them to follow the law and no further. We don't rough up people. We don't lie, and such as that. But I think in New Hampshire, we do a good job overall. I think we could use some tweaks, but we do a good job. And our government is so close to the people. When people make mistakes, we get it fixed. So those are the things I think I'd say.
All right. So if voters want to know any more about you, is there a website or page they can go to learn about you?
DaveWheeler.org. And they can go to the website. They can send me a message, ask me a question through the email that's there as well. And you can call me. Sometimes the best way to get a hold of me is on the cell phone, 765-2893. We try to be as responsive as we can when people have questions, and be as direct as possible too.
All right. Well, we appreciate you taking the time.
My pleasure.